Beagle from TOC Worldwide here at TOC Americas. I'm here with Henry Ziemer from the Center of Strategic International Studies in the US. And we just heard you, at a very interesting panel. I'm very curious. So I wanted to ask you a few more questions. So I just wanted to ask you, Henry, what is the view of the US government right now with regards to the port and maritime sector? Like, what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I think there's two overarching thoughts that the US has on the port and maritime sector. The first from a geopolitical perspective, and in light of rising competition with China, Russia, other great powers around the world, the United States is trying to secure its ports and secure its supply chains. Of course, and it's thinking about who controls critical infrastructure, where the technology is coming from, how secure that supply chain is looking. The second thing that the United States is looking at is from more of a, I would say, a conventional security standpoint, well, we say, which has to do with organized crime. And one thing we've seen this administration focusing heavily on is narcotics interdiction and drug trafficking. And that, of course, is critical because port and maritime sector logistics is often, attacked by bad actors, transnational criminal organizations that are seeking to leverage the legitimate commerce for their own needs. And so I think this administration has really wants to take the fight to drug traffickers. And part of that is obviously in the maritime domain. One thing I'll just highlight that I didn't get into is the United States is standing up a brand new task force. The U.S. military is standing up a brand new task force in the Caribbean dedicated to maritime smuggling and narcotics interdiction. How that's going to play out with the ports and maritime logistics remains to be seen, but I think it's a signal that the U.S. is focusing on this much more than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, so there is definitely a focus on security. I think you touched upon that.
Yeah.
And in that regards, in that regard, you guys are working with, focusing on Caribbean and Latin ports and terminals. Are there any specific, action points, obviously without disclosing anything sensitive, but any action points that you guys want to tackle, or what's the strategy, would you say?
Yeah, I'll say that, this is, and I mentioned this on the panel, there are challenges and opportunities. The challenges side obviously is an increased kind of securitization of commerce is generally bad for trade efficiency. It slows things down. It can create sort of unwanted delays or additional scanning that may not always be required. But it also creates opportunities for countries and for operators that are willing to engage in the United States, kind of going to the US and say, these are the challenges we're facing. This is what we need to succeed. And here's where you can kind of plug in and help us. And so I see that, especially when it comes to intelligence sharing. The US has a lot of latent intelligence collection capabilities, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance agencies like, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, have been tracking criminal movements for years. And there's often a challenge in actually getting that information to local law enforcement or port operators. How can you kind of improve your cross-season procedures? Also on technology, how can the United States provide more flexible financing for stuff like cargo scanners, and security cameras, equipment like that? That's an area where I think we haven't seen the U.S. playing as much. We've often seen other players like China actually being more involved in the kind of tech side of things. But that's an area where I think there might be an opportunity for the U.S. To go in and help some regional ports modernize.
And invest maybe on technology for scanning containers or,
Totally. I'll just hop on that, say, obviously technology is important, but it doesn't mean, a lick. You don't have the training to go along with that. So, and that's an area where I think the U.S. can also be very impactful because they do have this expertise and this knowledge that they can share with the region.
And then something else I wanted to ask you, without going into the controversial elements, we've all seen the news over the past months from the word tariff that has been, I think, at this point overused.
Yeah.
In general, there is a perception of a slightly aggressive approach to trade. Let's say, can we expect maybe a more cooperative approach with the port and terminal region coming from the US in the coming months? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah. I think aggressive is the right word for it. And I don't want to beat around the bush. I think that what we've seen is the United States much more willing to flex its economic muscles in the region. And I think in the coming months, we're probably going to see that continue to increase. We've seen hopefully resolution soon, I hope, to the Brazil tariffs.
Yeah.
But I think that Colombia is the next kind of front in that, and who knows what comes next. I'll be checking Twitter after this to see where that's going. Um, what I will say is, and this is the point I raised in my panel, is the importance of port and terminal operators, the industry as a whole, um, being active in the media space and sharing their narrative. Because the one thing we do see that moves the needle sometimes is when U.S. companies and other firms that have a role to play in the U.S. economy are able to go out there and say, this is what these disruptions are causing for us.
Being more local.
Exactly. And being able to really set that narrative in both local and international media. Very critical.
And I think just building on that, it's very interesting to hear, not just from the port and terminal sectors, but also, as you mentioned, from the companies that are manufacturing, the owners of the cargo, because without them, there is no supply chain.
Absolutely.
Last but not least, just to wrap it up, is there any message that you would like to give, from CSIC and the U.S. government to the industry, like something they should be aware of?
Yeah. The message I would say is that knowledge is power. And I mentioned the kind of challenges and opportunities. I mentioned the opportunities. I think the United States is constantly looking for what to do. And so what I would say to the industry is if you perceive a need, or you want to take advantage of this increased focus to make your port operations more secure, more modern, more efficient, whatnot, it's important that you go to the United States with that argument. The U.S. isn't going to come to you. It's not going to come to you. It's often might not have the best idea of what your port or industry needs. But if you say, here's how we'd like to be a better partner, and here's how assisting us with X, Y, or Z can contribute to the United States goals of making port logistics more secure, making America safer, more prosperous, that's going to be the key.
Yeah. So there you have it. It's all about communication. Exactly. Well, anyway, thank you so much. I would love to keep chatting, but
we've got a busy day ahead of us. All right.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And there you have it. Join us at TOC Americas for the party. And if you are not here, go to www.talkworldwide.com to learn more about our events. See you. Bye.
Bye.